Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Tonight's story is explosive, controversial, and shaking global conversations from New Delhi to Washington and from Moscow to London. What we are witnessing right now is not just another chapter in Russia's long political drama. This is a moment many analysts are calling the beginning of irreversible transformation. Moscow stands on the brink of chaos. Vladimir Putin's grip appears weaker than ever before, and a massive demographic, economic, and social shift is unfolding right in the heart of Russia. A shift so dramatic that critics are saying Putin is not just losing control of the country, he is actively ending the Russia we once knew. Across Russia's major cities, from Moscow to St. Petersburg, from Yekaterinburg to Vladivostok, the streets look different than they did a decade ago. New languages are heard, new communities are visible, and new economic forces are reshaping daily life. One of the most striking elements of this transformation is the growing presence of Indian workers, professionals, students, and entrepreneurs. Estimates vary, rumors exaggerate, and headlines amplify the numbers, but the reality is undeniable. Russia is experiencing one of the largest foreign labor and migration shifts in its modern history, and Indians are at the center of it. This did not happen overnight. The roots of this moment stretch back years, even decades. Russia has been struggling with a demographic crisis for a long time. A declining birth rate, an aging population, and the devastating human cost of prolonged conflicts have hollowed out the workforce. Entire industries began facing labor shortages. Construction stalled, factories slowed, logistics collapsed, and even basic services started to feel the strain. For years, the Kremlin tried to mask the problem with nationalist rhetoric and promises of self-sufficiency. But reality does not bend to propaganda forever. As sanctions tightened and Western companies exited the Russian market, the situation worsened. Skilled professionals left the country in waves. Young Russians, fearing conscription, economic collapse, or political repression, fled to Central Asia, Europe, and beyond. This exodus created a vacuum, one that could not be filled by slogans or televised speeches. Russia needed workers, engineers, doctors, IT specialists, drivers, builders, and technicians. It needed them urgently. That is where India entered the picture. India, with its massive young population, global workforce, and expanding international footprint, became a natural partner. Diplomatic ties between Moscow and New Delhi have historically been strong, rooted in Cold War alliances and defense cooperation. As Russia found itself increasingly isolated, it leaned heavily on countries that were willing to maintain relations. India did not cut ties. Trade continued, energy deals expanded, and quietly, steadily, labor pathways opened. At first, it was small numbers, a few thousand workers here, a few hundred specialists there. But as Russia's internal crisis deepened, the demand exploded, recruitment agencies multiplied, contracts were signed, universities offered special programs, companies began actively seeking Indian talent. What followed was a surge that shocked even seasoned observers. Now, images circulate online of crowded metro stations in Moscow, filled with foreign workers, of construction sites staffed almost entirely by South Asian labor, of Indian grocery stores, restaurants, and community centers appearing across Russian cities. Social media exaggerates, critics inflame, and supporters defend. But the perception has taken on a life of its own. 1 million Indians in Russia has become a symbol, whether fully accurate or not, of how dramatically the country is changing. For many Russians, this change is deeply unsettling. Nationalist voices claim Putin has betrayed the Russian people. They argue that by pushing the country into endless conflict and isolation, he destroyed the workforce and forced Russia to rely on foreign labor on an unprecedented scale. They say this is not strength, but surrender. In their eyes, the Kremlin's policies have turned Russia into a shell of its former self, dependent on outsiders to keep the economy alive. On the streets, tensions are rising. Protests flare up, sometimes small, sometimes unexpectedly large. Workers complain about wages, inflation, and job competition. Veterans question why there is money to recruit foreigners, but not enough to support Russian families. Young people ask why their future was sacrificed for wars that brought only sanctions and suffering. The chaos is not just economic or social, it is psychological. For decades, Putin's image was built on the promise of stability. He was the man who ended the chaos of the 1990s, who restored order, pride, and national identity. But today, that image is cracking. Stability has given way to uncertainty. Pride has turned into resentment. Identity is now contested on the streets, in workplaces, and even within families. Meanwhile, the Indian community in Russia finds itself in a complex and often uncomfortable position. Many came seeking opportunity, not controversy. They fill jobs Russians no longer want or cannot do. They keep factories running, hospitals staffed, and infrastructure projects alive. Some are highly skilled professionals in IT and engineering. Others are laborers sending money back home to support families. For them, Russia is not a battlefield of ideology, but a workplace. Yet they are increasingly drawn into Russia's internal turmoil. Online narratives paint them as symbols of change, sometimes unfairly blaming them for problems they did not create. In reality, they are part of a much larger story, the story of a country struggling to survive the consequences of its own political choices. International observers are watching closely. Western analysts argue this is evidence that Putin's vision of a self-reliant, sovereign Russia has failed. They say a state that once prided itself on military power and industrial might is now dependent on foreign labor to function. They call it a silent collapse, not marked by tanks in the streets, but by demographic charts and labor statistics. Supporters of the Kremlin push back. They claim Russia is simply adapting, becoming more multipolar, more global in a new way. They argue that attracting foreign workers is a sign of economic resilience, not weakness. They point to historical empires that thrived on diversity and migration. In their narrative, Russia is not ending, it is evolving. But even among loyalists, anxiety is growing. The question many Russians are asking in private is no longer whether Putin is strong, but whether he understands what his policies have unleashed. A society under strain does not break all at once. It fractures slowly. Trust erodes, anger builds, and eventually a spark ignites what seemed impossible only months earlier. Moscow today feels like a city holding its breath. Police presence is heavier. Surveillance is tighter. State media grows more aggressive in tone, attacking critics and deflecting blame. Yet beneath the surface, conversations are changing. People speak more openly about fear, exhaustion, and loss. They compare prices, count the empty desks at work, remember friends who left or never returned. In this environment, the idea that Putin is ending Russia is not just a headline. It is a reflection of a deeper fear that the social contract has been broken. Russians accepted authoritarian rule in exchange for stability and dignity. What happens when those promises collapse? For India, the situation presents both opportunity and risk. Strengthened ties with Russia bring economic benefits, access to energy, and geopolitical leverage. But being associated with a country in turmoil carries its own dangers. Indian citizens abroad could become targets of resentment. Diplomatic balancing becomes more delicate with every escalation. The world is entering a phase where migration, conflict, and economic survival are deeply intertwined. Russia's streets tell this story vividly. Different faces, different languages, one shared uncertainty about the future. Is this the beginning of a new Russia, more international but less cohesive? Or is it the prelude to deeper unrest, where demographic change becomes a trigger rather than a solution? As night falls over Moscow, the lights of the Kremlin still shine, projecting an image of control. But outside those walls, reality feels far more fragile. History shows us that great powers rarely collapse in a single dramatic moment. They unravel through decisions that slowly hollow them out from within. Whether the number is 100,000 or 1 million, the growing presence of Indians on Russian streets has become a symbol of something much bigger than migration. It symbolizes a nation grappling with the consequences of isolation, war, and authoritarian rule. It symbolizes the end of one era and the uncertain birth of another. The coming months will be critical, will Putin double down, tightening control and suppressing unrest? Will economic pressures force reforms that were once unthinkable? Or will internal fractures widen until the chaos can no longer be contained? One thing is clear: Russia is changing, and the change is visible to anyone willing to look beyond official statements. The streets of Moscow are telling a story the Kremlin cannot fully control. A story of loss, adaptation, tension, and transformation. This is not just Russia's story. It is a warning to the world about the true cost of political decisions made without accountability. And as events continue to unfold, one question remains at the center of it all. Is Vladimir Putin presiding over Russia's survival, or over its slow, irreversible end? Stay with us, because this story is far from over, and what happens next may redefine global power in ways no one is truly prepared for.